Today we're going to learn about, are there black sheeps in your family? And then we're going to give you extra records to look at, or even some examples of the various black sheeps that you may find in your family. So today we'll first start off with some known black sheep that people considered as black sheep that we normally look at and say, oh, there's none like that in our family, but we'll see. I'll give you the definition of what it means to be a black sheep, as also the variety of types of black sheep that are out there. There's at least 9 referring to the genealogy research of black sheep. And then I'm going to give you an example of some of the black sheeps I researched, both in my husband's family as well as my own. So yes, I have a few black sheeps, and so does my husband's. So we were quite surprised on some of them. So okay, so this is the main site for black sheep ancestors that have databases that you may want to check out some surnames of your family, just see if there's anything in it. This black sheep ancestor site has Canada, Britain, and the United States. And so I checked out on Indiana and noticed that there's a Sam Bass and then Johnny Ringo. And I thought, they have Indiana connections. Whoa. So here's Sam Bass. He was only 27 years old when he died, but he was an orphan by the time he was 13, went to an uncle's house for a while, ran away, spent at least a year in Mississippi, and then all of a sudden he went down to Denton, Texas, and started being a cowboy and stuff, and then he had some issues and stuff and became an outlaw. Pearl Elliott is another Indiana black sheep. She ran a 21-room boarding house, prostitution type setting in Kokomo. She got to know Harry Pete Pierpont, who committed bank robberies in Kokomo and New Harmony. Through him, she met John Dillinger, and she eventually became one of 2 women listed on the Chicago Department's Public Enemies list in 1933. This one I found in somebody's genealogy newsletter from the Clinton County Genealogy Society. So it's, you can find them anywhere, newsletters from societies or whatever. You can find information on various black sheeps. And also out there was something like the hole in the wall for the United States. It's called the Big Muddy Badlands in Saskatchewan. And as you notice at the bottom, the one that I clicked on was Sundance Kid. He also went up to Canada to avoid the authorities from capturing him at times. And it was kind of thought, wow, you can find out all kinds of information of where they might have ended up to if they wanted to avoid being captured. So there's all kinds of information out there for you, depending on the type of black sheep you may be looking for. And so here from Great Britain, they arrested young children and have photographed them. This one here was one of their photographs of a prisoner. But they arrested several young children for various types of crime. So there's a lot of information out there. You just need to know, could have been one of yours. So some famous families also had black sheep who embarrassed them. James Capone did not want to be connected with Al Capone and the other 2 brothers, Frank and Ralph. So he changed his name to Richard Hart. John Adams' son, Charles, failed to live up to his family's expectation. Rayner, and I don't know how to spell the last name, Hose, was stoned by his family because he refused to ignore that his grandfather, Rudolph, was a monster. He always knew his grandfather was a monster. He was the commandant for the Auschwitz concentration camp. And he acknowledged that. The rest of the family wanted to avoid it. Okay, Henry Ford's great-grandson, Benson Jr., preferred a life of parties, gambling, fast cars, and drugs instead of working at Ford Motor Company. King George IV was a national embarrassment because he liked his lifestyle and had self-indulgence and stuff. And then he changed his behavior and stuff when he took the throne in 1820. Okay, and then there's another spot you can search for it, you know, famous families that had black sheeps. And again, Al Gore had one called Al Gore III. So, I mean, once you became in the political spotlight and stuff, the press looked for your black sheeps. They weren't criminals and stuff, but you found ways for embarrassment and stuff. Okay. The Cambridge Academic Dictionary considers a black sheep someone who embarrasses a group or family because a person is different or has gotten into trouble. Another part was possibly had done something bad that brings embarrassment or shame to his or her family. Black sheeps are in your family. Anyone can be a black sheep just for about any reason. The black sheep is simply a person who deviates from family rules. They are, in some families, they are used as a scapegoat and object lesson to keep the other family members in line. Like it's always saying, you don't want to be like so-and-so. You know, just to say, okay, I better be good because they'll compare me. And so, yeah. But we do have black sheep. There's various types of ways you might not realize they could have been a black sheep. Okay. Black sheep are not skeletons in the closet. Black sheep is, their information is circulated. It needs to be seen, talked about. Skeletons are hidden. They're put into like a closet or a box, and your family members do not mention it at all. There's no way of bringing up a skeleton in your closet. But the black sheep hits family several different ways. Questions to ask a family when you discover a black sheep. How much of this information should I tell or write about? Which family members should I be talking to see whether or not they already know about the incident or the black sheep, or may not want the story to be told? How long ago did the event occur? Was the individual or family member still living? Have you talked to them? What are their reactions? Do they want it told? If they don't want it told, you can still write about it, about the incident, but you need to keep it private. You can't publish it online. You can't put it in a book, but you can write a note somewhere that's hidden away in your software database or even just on a piece of paper in your file folders so that that incident doesn't get lost, because it might be a major piece of information for somebody else when they're researching that individual to find more about that person. It's just that you can't bring it up and cause more embarrassment. You need to discuss in private ways of seeing if you can or cannot. I saw a recent article where the guy says, sure, write about it. I'm not ashamed of it. It will help others to understand how I am. So, I mean, it depends on how you ask, how they react. You need to be very conscious of how they may feel about you finding this incident and then discussing it. There's a variety of black sheep, like I said, the criminal activity, refusal to follow a mandated directive, such as an arranged marriage. Whether or not it's unwanted or unplanned pregnancy, extramarital affair, mental or medical disabilities that can embarrass the family, marriage outside the approved ethnic or religious group, employed in what was perceived as an unacceptable occupation, failure to achieve a family designated educational, social, religious, or occupational goal that the family has for you as an individual or for other members of the family also. The individual decides that he or she doesn't want to be involved with his or her family. They don't want anything to do with them. They move away, they disappear. It could be due to some of their mental problems or issues. You never know why that person makes that decision, but all of a sudden they cut themselves off. Okay, so criminal activity, we always see it as murder, kidnapping, treason, armed robbery and assault, embezzlement and forgery, bootlegging, horse thief. And then there's newer criminal activities coming up now in this day and age, just like being a drug runner. So your basic resource, again, is what you normally always research, but then you have to add newspaper articles you could find on the individual, court records, transcripts of the court case, jail records, prison records. Maybe a family member wrote a diary, journals, and letters. You never know what could pop up in your research or what you find just going through old books and stuff, and all of a sudden you come across somebody else's journal and you look at it and go, oh, this is a gold mine for who's ever family, because look at all this information, pieces that they would never find anywhere else. So prison records, you can see familysearch.org. And as I did a search on prison records, the Louisiana State Penitentiary records did show up, as well as my colleague Elizabeth also gave me a link to this, but I double checked to see if there was others. But I just love this listing of all kinds of records, the dates and stuff. So you can really search on just the basic name to see, does anybody with my last name happen to be in there, or one of the family members? We've missed them, we've lost them, I can't find them. You might find them in another state or in another county that just dropped from the ends of the earth, but they're there if you find the record. Okay, so the criminal activity in my family was a murder. My aunt had heard during one of the family gatherings from one of her great uncles, had shot his wife. She didn't quite hear the complete story because all of a sudden they noticed that there were young kids around. So they switched to French. They never taught their kids French either, so they never got to learn what these stories were about. She thought they mentioned John, who shot his wife because he caught her in an affair and then went to jail. She believed it happened sometime after 1928 because their father was gone, was no longer alive. So in the fall of 1928, he had passed away. So I had a time frame to start looking. So my second great grandfather had 3 brothers, and one of them was Frank, John, and William. Well, I checked them in the Michigan Archives of Michigan's prison index cards. None of them were listed. So then I started searching for death records of the 3 sister-in-laws. Nothing regarding murder or shootings or anything. So I thought, okay, he had 8 sisters. So I started with the oldest. So when I started looking for her death record, there it came out, and the cause of death, homicide. So I pulled up newspapers for that time frame from Detroit and Saginaw. The title said there was 2 homicides and a suicide. I thought, whoa. So here's the 3 issues I came across the first time I searched this family. And sure enough, on December 18th, 1929, William Denzer shot his wife, Amelia, and one of his daughters. He had 3 daughters. One died way before this time due to a car accident, so there's 2 daughters left. So I had to figure out, what was going on more. I mean, it caught my curiosity. It caught my mom's. So, I really started searching for it so I could talk to her more about it. She was intrigued about what was going on because this is a story that they kept quiet. And of course, the sister, Mrs. Fred Bracci, I think her name was Alexandra, decided that her brother-in-law was mentally deranged, especially after her sister was murdered. So the day's concept, when I checked some other records, I was checking newspapers for December 18th plus the 19th. The police figured out it took him 2 days to decide what he was doing. So the day before the murder, he had withdrew money from the bank. His holdings was $100. He gave his personal effects to a neighbor. He returned home and made another attempt on the morning of December 18th to get his wife and daughter to move. He so badly wanted to go back to Saginaw. And both his wife and daughter did not want to go back to the farm on Saginaw. They enjoyed living in Garden City. Well, he started shooting at his wife and stuff and his daughter. He shot his daughter in the bathroom and his wife in the bedroom. And then as the son-in-law heard the shooting, he started to go in and saw his wife in the bathroom and quickly went out to a neighbor to call the police. Well, when the police got there, just as they went in, they heard the last shot where William himself had committed suicide. So this is the information I found in the news, another issue later about his life. And he was no longer working as a mechanic. He hadn't worked for months, so that's probably why he wanted to go back to the farm. He could be busy and do things. And then a relative, 59 years after the event, was interviewed about William and Amelia. They believed Amelia found German marks and then called the FBI. William came home and found out what his wife found and got worried about it. And as you can see, he took her hostage. I was waiting for the other two daughters. One looked into the window and saw what was happening and hid. And by the time the authorities got there, they were dead. And then another 30 years after that, they were coming up with some assumptions. He had to be a German spy. He was converting his savings to German marks and planning to return to Germany. But then the niece decided she wanted to say what he was like. He was mean, he was stern, he was short but well-built. And it was believed that he had served in Germany military. Jenny survived and later married a Sherwood Rice and opened up the country club. So I decided to check on some of this stuff. William Denzer came to the U.S. in 1885. He was 13 years old. So he did not serve, as we know, in the German military. He did apply for 3 passport applications. 2 of them gave reasons. One, he had to settle his father's estate in Alsace-Lorraine. And the second one was to visit his mother. About the spy, I haven't contacted the FBI to see if they have a file on him or not. But talking about Jenny Denzer, she did marry a Sherwood Rice, but it was her son, Sherwood Jr., who had built the country club in Tuscola County. So some of the information was correct, part of it wasn't, but I haven't quite cut all of it out. But I mean, I don't know about the German spy. So, and then the next criminal activity I located was a kidnapping by accident. In 2018, my husband received a connection with a second cousin that, they were related through DNA. Well, I kind of figured out the initials, who she was. So I wrote to her regarding a different sister, Rose, saying she married a weaver. What was her husband's first name? And did she have a son named Jack? So I remember seeing a Christmas card from Rose and Jack. She didn't know about Jack, but she did know her husband's name. But then she goes, did you know that Marie's daughter was kidnapped? I thought, ooh, can you send me articles? No dates, no location. But it happened in Spokane because that's where they were living. So when the Spokane newspapers were added to newspapers.com, I found some pretty interesting information regarding the kidnapping. Okay, the little girl is Mildred Lucille, who was 3 years old when she was kidnapped. The lady next in the other photo was the one that took care of her for a while her parents were having domestic differences and were deciding what to do. Well, I noticed the picture of the little girl resembles my granddaughter so much, just the facial and the expression on the face. My youngest granddaughter looks pretty much like her. So I thought, well, okay, she's definitely one of the family members in the Theusch line. And so I pulled up him. They secured a warrant against Sam, but they also called him Alexander in some of the issues, and Helen. They had a case against Sam was dropped because he had claimed he had no knowledge. He was surprised when he came home the day of the kidnapping that his wife had sold the furniture and there was no notice, no anything. Pinkertons tried to trace her and the child and got as far as New York. Due to the large populations, they lost track of them. And then this one here is where the guy's accusing her of wanting to give away the tot, stating that she put an ad in the paper. She signed a release of surrender. So I would like to get the court records to see if those releases and stuff came in or if it was just hearsay. But there was no evidence and stuff, and this accusation was also dropped. So, I mean, there's a lot of stories I now need to really bite into and possibly go up to Spokane and do some research. So it's exciting to find different type things. But my question is to begin research. When she escaped, did she change her name as well as the child's name? What was Helen's maiden name? Did she go back to it because nobody up there in Spokane knew who she was originally? What other names could she have used or had used? And did she use any of her parents' or siblings' names? And how many times could she have been married? I knew of at least 2. And did she have any children? And did any of her siblings' obituaries mention them? So this is my next task once I start figuring out if I really want to go into it or just wait for some results to hit up. So when some of the records I saw, I found her in 1910, 1800, and 1900. Marriage records looking for a maiden name, newspapers regarding a marriage announcement for her last husband and plus a divorce. So she, with her second marriage, was Clementine Lusk or Mrs. Harry James, Mrs. J. James, Mrs. Helen James. And in January 1908, her husband had put in a paper that he was not responsible for any of her bills or anything else that she was doing. And he listed her name and her aliases. So I thought, whoa, there's a few names. And then later on, all of a sudden, she's getting a divorce. He sued for divorce, but was denied it. But I mean, he got the divorce, but he couldn't get the alimony that he wanted from her. So this story is getting really interesting, and it's not my direct line. It's part of my husband's line, but not direct. So it's like, how much do I really want to get involved in it? But it's an interesting story that I can help somebody help me work with it later on, possibly, if they really were into like this kind of stuff. But when I did find it, this is their marriage announcement, James A. Lusk and Clementine, when they got married in 1906. Found out that her name was a null, but her parents' names were Holman and Douglas. So that right there shows me 2 marriages. Atkinson is the 3rd. So it was like, okay. And so here are some names to look at. And, Helen went by Helen, Clemza, Clementine. And then she's used Atkinson, James, Lusk, Knoll, Holloman, spelled different ways. Her possible surname she may use is her mother's maiden name, Douglas. Possibly her sister's married names, Deschamps, Keck, or Robertson. So there's some other ways to try to find her if I wanted to go this route, unless she picks a name completely different. My dream is one of Mildred's grandchildren or children or great-grandchildren will do a DNA test, and that we will get a connection saying, hey, we got somebody new. I don't recognize them. I don't recognize the tree. It's really bizarre, but yet they fit in this category. And at the same time, I would search to see if they share anything with these people, which is basically majorly the Theusch line with Teculic, and it's not sharing the other half of my husband's line, which is the Bouches and the Couturas. So if I can get somebody that connects with these people besides what we have, we may have found her, but so far we have not had that opportunity to locate her. But it's my dream that sooner or later it could pop up. DNA would be great if it happens that way. Okay, mandatory directives. You kind of wonder. It's either required by law or by rule. The definition of directive means it's a guide, it's directions. It's going to tell you you have to achieve an action or a goal. So basically, church regulations, like if you break them, you might not be able to participate in communion, such like the Catholics, it used to be, I don't know if it still is or not, when the couple got a divorce, they were kind of like not able to participate in communion, even if they attended church, they just couldn't partake. I don't know if that's still true. It's just something my sister-in-law told me when she got her divorce. Some church members may not be allowed to associate with these people and do things. Military, the disciplinaries, court-martial, dishonorable discharge, plus maybe other discipline areas where they get demerits and things. Family may, just tell them, get out of here, because you're not obeying us. We don't want anything to do with you. It's hard to say how this mandatory directive could affect someone in your family and whether or not if someone did do something that they were just moved to the side. Reform schools and industrial schools. Reform schools were used of someone who was convicted of a crime. And industrial schools, they were picking up the vagrants, maybe some children needing protection, and someone maybe doing a very minor crime that they could quickly correct. So industrial schools were different than informs. And then military, we had the well-known Pappy Boyington, who had a squadron called the Black Sheep. Another military person was Sergeant Jake McNeese. He was assigned to be a demolition sabotage thing, and his group became the Filthy 13. He shaved his head and painted his face before he dropped behind the German lines for D-Day. The look caught on with his man. So he was considered a black sheep because he was going against the U.S. Army regulations of what a soldier looks like. Resources that you might find is church records, military papers, newspaper articles, family stories again. I mean, you might think, oh, that's too far-fetched. You never know with some of this black sheep exactly what might, especially with the mandatory directives and some issues, how much of it is true or not with some of the stories you hear. But it's clues to go elsewhere besides your standard general genealogy records that we always search. Unplanned or unwanted pregnancies. Unplanned, you usually were sent to a relative living in another state or maybe even a few counties far away where people wouldn't recognize you. You normally stayed at least until the birth or a few months longer, so people didn't realize you were actually pregnant and stuff. Usually if you came back after 9 months away, people automatically assumed that you went away due to pregnancy. Unwanted, the individual usually gave up their child for adoption or gave it to somebody else to raise. Quick marriages happened on some of these unplanned, possibly unwanted marriages, depending on their beliefs. Okay, sometimes the unplanned could be incest, rape. Unwanted is just, you just don't want a child. I had a cousin who had one child and she didn't want another one when she found out she was pregnant. And it was like, okay, the hardship and stuff family members have, but some people just don't feel like they can be parents, so they tend to give the child away to a family member or a neighbor or some friends or something. They just try to find ways of getting that memory or experience out of their lives. So that's kind of like a black sheep. It's going to disappear, this information, and you'll never know. There could be a possibility you never know until you come across it by accident. Here is one of an unplanned pregnancy. My grandpa and grandma. She said she went out for a buggy ride Sunday, told my grandfather she was pregnant. He pulled over to the county courthouse and they got married. Well, I looked at the date of their first child. They got married in November 1924. Their first child was born in April 1925. Definitely an unplanned pregnancy. They had 6 kids later, so. Okay, here's one of an unwanted one. I questioned this one because this woman had 3 children, 1 still living, but that child's not living with her. And then I noticed up above, her mother with her second husband has a granddaughter living with him at age 5. Now, was that hers or was it her brother's child when the brother passed away? Don't know. So I checked their records. The birth record, they spelled it wrong, but they listed the child as illegitimate. So I figured it out. Since they listed as a granddaughter, it had to be Daniel Harp's son, who was there in the 1900 census, who had possibly had relations with his stepsister. If not, there's another brother from this gentleman that was already married in a different location. So I don't know which person did it. It's a possibility. So as you notice, I put a question mark. But when I discussed my dad about Doris, he goes, well, she might not really be a relative. So, I mean, he didn't acknowledge her, but she was a little bit older than my grandfather at this point in time. My grandfather wasn't even born yet. So basically, she just gave her up and her mother took it. And so, okay, looking for records for unwedded mothers or unplanned. You can look at the homes for unmarried women. There's a lot of them all over the place. There's books and registers and things that could be available. Some of those registrations may be at a college archive, regional archive, maybe even a state archive if they were a state unwed home for mothers or had an agreement with a state archive office to take their records. So they were known as maternity homes or homes for unwed mothers. Some of them were called maternity sanitarium. And so I did a search in the city directories out of Ancestry to see if there's some way that we might find them. So I put in the keyword with no other names, the word unwed mothers. Well, Edward B. Conway appeared in 1957 at this address for unwed mothers. I didn't go farther into the research, but it would be kind of interesting to know if he was living there at the time, how old he was. Was he an employee there, or was he like had some involvement? It's hard to say. But it was quite unusual. I was expecting to see a woman's name, and this is what came up. Extramarital affairs, man or woman, secret marriages. They may have left a family and started a new family. The records could be in the court records where they're asking for funding to take care of the children because the husband left and she's all alone, can't go to work because her kids are all young. or she's in the process of seeking divorce and needs assistance. News articles could also tell you if they were divorcing this person. All of a sudden, you get all this information there together. Next thing you know, I'm not responsible for this person's dead anymore. And thinking, okay, something's going on. What is it? A divorce getting ready to go, or what? I did have a great grandmother who I never met, even though I was 14 when she died, married 3 times using her maiden name and never divorced her first husband. When she got married the 3rd time, that marriage was legit because her husband had passed away. So I was quite surprised. I always thought they were divorced. When I talked to my dad about a death record that said he was married still, he goes, yeah, my grandmother never divorced her. And I was like, okay. So, it was never brought up. It only came up when I questioned some of the records I was finding. And why didn't it say he was divorced? Why didn't it say he was single? Stories came out then. So, sometimes when you find a strange record and you're wondering, is it true or did they forget? That's when you're going to find your black sheeps. So in this one, again, I was telling you, like, the personal things, they're not responsible. And then back in the 20s and even earlier, you find a lot of divorce records. They did let people know that people were getting divorced. Disconnecting from family. They decide they want to separate. They can't deal with an accident. They can't deal with arguments and parents. They may feel a failure and embarrassment, which may include a divorce. Refuses to see a child or children. Okay, there's also mental and medical disability. They consider it's where it interferes with your ability to work. You can't provide for yourself financially. It reduces your capacity to complete tasks, and it prevents one from caring for him or her and others and for themselves. Some mental disabilities, demonic possession, insanity, brain trauma, considered idiots or imbeciles, bipolar, alcoholism, drug addiction, and dementia. Types of restraints used this is a Quaker asylum back in the 1800s. When they used restraints on those that were mentally disturbed and stuff, hand straps, hopples, straight waist jackets, chair, bed straps, muffs, and ankle strap. Reasons for restraints: the physical, they destroyed property, tried suicide, tried to escape, they were attacking others. I made a misspelling there, sorry. And behavioral, they were improper, noisy, they got too excited, or they threatened people. Reasons for seclusions in these kind of mental homes: they were noisy, badly behaved, refused to work, again, getting exciting, threatening, broke a promise or a rule, behavior was unresponsive to the treatment that they were given, restrained, was contradicting, and then the elopement, and they were exciting others. There is in our catalog the 150 years of caring, the continuing history of Canada's oldest mental health facility, compiled from the public records that were held at Central Care. And so this is the title of the book and the call number. So, there are books regarding various asylums. So if you knew you had an ancestor or a side kind of like collateral type relative that wasn't a direct, but it's part of the family, you may find some books on the asylums. There is a book on the various asylums in the United States, but it's just postcards of pictures of the facilities. Medical disabilities, head injuries, physical, genetic, placed in a home or a facility because family was not able to take care of him or her. Okay, this one is a medical disability I found during a research for my granddaughter. This little girl was 1 year old. Her name is Coletta. She was sent to a St. Anne's Infant Asylum in Cleveland. The reason why: her mother died, father in jail. Father murdered mother in front of a 16-year-old sister. There was physical issues of the 1 year old girl. So the aunts and uncles were care for her, and the children, I think there were 7 of them, got split up between both sides of the family to take care of. None of them took them all in at once, but this little 1 year old was just sent to an infant asylum to have somebody else raise her. The nuns from St. Anne's in Cleveland called her the owl child. The bright light of the day blinds her. During the day, she is sitting in the corner facing a wall to keep the sun out of her eyes. Bright lights during the day blinds her. Her eyes are colorless. Her irises are not blue, brown, or gray. Her skin and hair are white. She can see objects at night that are hidden from others, and she isn't afraid of the dark. I did a little bit more research on her. She died when she was 3. I was kind of hoping that, she was adopted, who she went to and stuff, but I saw the title, Owl Child, and I thought that was strange, but I could see why the family didn't want to take care of her. They would be sleeping so they could raise the rest of the kids, and someone would have to stay up with this one during the night because that would be when she could fully function without having sunlight bother her. So, that caused issues in the family. So she was sent to a facility to be taken care of. Marriage outside the approved ethnic or religious groups. Here are some of them. I do know that one of my husband's family is Luxembourg, and there wasn't that many people in New York around when he immigrated. And so he married a German person only because their language was so close that it was accepted for a Luxembourg person to marry into the Germans because their language was so close they could talk to each other. So some people, they didn't want to mix the ethnic groups, or they did not want to mix religious groups. So some of these had some really tight restrictions for a while. I don't know if a lot of them still are like that, but most of the time they usually were. Possible punishment for marriage outside the approved: not able to attend the church, cannot get involved in the social activities of the area, and unable to talk to family members. Employment of jobs that may not be acceptable. Well, back in the 1800s and stuff, it was like being a gambler, saloon girls, escort service, drug runners, running moonshine, some low paying wages that really you couldn't take care of your kids, or that family felt were below their social standards. Failure to achieve educational, social, or religious occupational goals, parents' expectation for college, friends and family believe what you should do, church ministry work, boss's expectation, and the number of hours over the standards. Sometimes they expect you to work more hours and you just couldn't. And so this one was regarding religious goals. Peter Zimmer met with bitter disappointment. It was in a history book. His son, that for years he had educated to become a priest, chose law instead of theology for his profession. So this was actually written in a book. And so it was quite interesting to realize that, this could cause a black sheep issue in a family. Family disconnection. Okay, this is a grandfather I never met, never knew was living until I graduated from high school. And then I asked my mom, who is this? She goes, my dad. And it was like, okay, I backed off. He was divorced in 1944 from my grandmother. At this time, he turned his back on his children. He did no phone calls on their birthdays, sent no cards. He did not participate in giving his kids Christmas presents. He would not talk on the phone to any family member regardless. I tried to call him once to find out more about the family in Wood County, Ohio. He did not come to the phone, and he would not answer my questions. And then when he passed away in 1989, he stated in his will, I have 5 children from my first marriage, and then he listed their names, and they get nothing, which included photographs. My mom would have loved to have gotten the family photos that he stole the day that he left my grandma. But it really hurt her when he came to this part. They get nothing. He didn't even want to state that they were his children. And then from the news article about bringing the black sheep back into the family fold, male or female, rich or poor, married or single, young or old, teetotaler or alcoholic. This person is often the object of ridicule, pity, envy, awe, fear, school embarrassment, or secret admiration. For as the proverb goes, there is a black sheep in every fold.